what they're giving us so far is what they think, Amazon thinks, is most important for us to see.
I'm invincible!
You're a loony.
Hey, yo, what up? ¿Qué pasa? So this video is, I think, going to target the concept of intellectual property because I've been having a very in-depth conversation with a viewer, thank you viewer, Annie68, I believe it is, in my comments of my video on the trailer for the Rings of Power that recently dropped. And this is my beef with the Rings of Power. There are two ways that you can think about it. You can say, oh, I just got to wait and see. And that's exactly right. We don't know exactly yet what's going to happen in Rings of Power. We have no idea. But that's what I was trying to hint on in the video that I made regarding the character of Erondir. We kind of know. What they're giving us so far is what they think, Amazon thinks, is most important for us to see. So one big sticking point or one point of conversation is the elf Celeborn, who is in the books Galadriel's husband of thousands of years. They were married in the First Age. I did some research on this, and I believe if I've got the family tree right, they had the same great-grandparents. Their grandparents were siblings, I think. One of the biggest characters that I came across was Eleuthingol, who in fact was the only elf to marry a lesser deity, Melian the Maya. And Maya is actually a class of gods and goddesses of which Sauron himself was a member. So anyway, I won't go into all that yet. I'll save that for a different one. I'm going to use some of what I wrote to be a springboard for talking about intellectual property. And the reason is this: Amazon does not have the rights to the Silmarillion. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the Silmarillion published posthumously. The Hobbit was called The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings is Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion is the Silmarillion. They stand alone, which is why I continue to call Rings of Power Amazon's Rings of Power. There are Lord of the Rings stories in Rings of Power, but I mean, the rings haven't even been made yet, so it's really not Lord of the Rings yet. And it should stand on its own because Lord of the Rings talks about the War of the Ring. That was the focus, and that happened in the Third Age, roughly 4,500 years. I mean, we're talking about millennia after the forging of the rings. So different stories require different titles. Amazon has the rights to the appendices to the Lord of the Rings. They have the rights to the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy books, but they do not have the rights to the Silmarillion. So here we go. So to give my 2 cents regarding intellectual property basically means the following. If I have, by law, intellectual property rights to an entity, to something, whatever it is, such as a patent, for example, even the things such as the very words and phrases that are spoken or written within a particular context, such as mechanical engineering in my case, then if you even just mention those words in whatever work you do, say I have a patent, you own something, you want to use my design, or you use my design without crediting me, I can, take you to court and require compensation from your profits because you utilized my intellectual property. But if you didn't make any profit, I can still sue you and I can, ruin your life because you basically used something without crediting me for what I own, for my design, for my work. That's a big point. So, I've seen this happen a lot. I've read about it. I've watched it happen firsthand. I've had a provisional patent in my life That didn't go anywhere, but hey, we did it. We did an entrepreneurial thing, and I'm familiar with the process. It didn't work out, but I know the process. I've seen people steal ideas from each other, all right? And sometimes they turn out to be meaningful, other times they may not, So for me, it was engineering graduate school. I have a master's in mechanical engineering, for whatever that's worth. Maybe it's not even worth anything. It's worth 2.5 years of my life, that's for sure. So I was exposed to a lot of that at a given time. And honestly, this gets into something else. I think it's similar to what writers go through, because what we did was brainstorming, all right? They put us all in a room. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge. They put us all together as graduate students, and they had us brainstorm and think up all this stuff. Like, yay, we get to solve problems. And then they just cherry pick what they want out of all the things that are on the table, and they use it or not. And then they churn that all up, and they mix that all up into where you don't know whether, whose idea it really was. I've played these head games. I know this drill. It's, I know this music. Let's change the beat. So here's an example of how StarCraft Discovery ripped off a guy who was making his own original computer game about tardigrades. So you can look all that. You can look all this up. I've been watching this stuff for years. All right, So it's not only about the content; it's about the use of the content, which I've discovered as a new YouTuber. The fair use doctrine, the fair use laws. You can get hit with that. I had so many videos that got hit with copyright claims. So they got blocked. I continue. I was on LinkedIn for a while, so maybe some people seeing me now, maybe they know me, maybe not. I don't know. I had up to like 1,300 connections on LinkedIn there for a while, and I got off of that because I got I saw some other scams, and I had some scam issues going on there. That's another story. Anyway, this social media stuff, there are pluses and minuses, and same with YouTube. But hey, here we are. In essence, engineering grad students are given problems to solve that lead to papers for their professors and lead to patented technological innovations for their professors and the institutions, the university. The student gets his name on a paper. It's like, yay, I get it published. I'm a published author. Woo, yay, shiny penny, shiny penny. And so, it's like, yeah, the university says, yeah, you get to graduate now. We'll let you graduate now that, you can graduate. Yeah, okay. So I gave, here's an example of, and it's good, it allows for young creative minds to solve problems and give their presentations. Great. But the people at the top still get to cherry pick. They've built it. They've built a system. All right, great, fine. This is where the intellectual property comes into play with Lord of the Rings. I talked about this a little bit. They own the rights to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, not the Silmarillion. And I recall that some people didn't like Peter Jackson's movies when they came out. So there are different themes going on here. I wasn't too sure about telepathy among elves. Turns out in some of Tolkien's own writings that elves could communicate thoughts with each other, thought to thought. So that was one thing. And I did know that Galadriel could sense what people were thinking, but that's not, and how they were feeling, but that's like Deanna Troi on Star Trek. That's empathy. That's extreme empathy. Empath. That's not exactly telepathic. That's not necessarily communication. It's only one-sided, one way with empathic. So I talked about this a little bit with my video on Outer Deer. So here's my question. We've got all these established characters, and what happened to Celeborn, who is basically, he's royalty, one of the wisest elves in Middle-earth, or, as I've been discussing with the viewer on YouTube here, Annie, or Círdan, the shipwright. He's one of the oldest and wisest elves. Why don't we hear about him? He has one of the elvish rings. Where's he at? Why isn't he in the new trailer? It's all about Galadriel, which is, I'm going okay. But, You know, it's interesting that her husband, Celeborn, actually gave her that name. On top of that, Elrond will be her future son-in-law, I believe, because Elrond marries Galadriel's daughter. Another story. So, I mean, getting back to the intellectual property stuff, I think that's pretty much, that's pretty much it. I'll link this in the description as well. This is the final point. So, on a middleearth.znight.org website, one of the commenters says, anything not in the text of The Lord of the Rings was not his to use. That is Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson could not use the word Celebrimbor because Celebrimbor was a name of a character from the Silmarillion. He couldn't talk about it. He couldn't say the word. This is how particular it is because legal copyrights, because lawsuits, because legal ramifications. So Peter Jackson had to make a few tweaks and set things within the context of Lord of the Rings only. So, you know, I mean, it gets down to even the very words that you use, the specific titles, the names. So this is why there are only hints at the Silmarillion. There are, I believe, Amazon was allowed to use elements from the Silmarillion, like the two trees, which we see in the trailer, on a case-by-case basis from the Tolkien estate, which is now kind of playing a little more fast and loose since Christopher Tolkien passed away because cha-ching. So, yeah, sure, it'd be nice to see all this stuff, but here's my take on Tolkien. I would rather see more of what his perspective is on his own work than I would see anyone else's, because I like what he already wrote. I don't need to see Amazon's invented characters. Maybe some people might say I'm being too hard on Arondir, but it's necessary. Because what is this character doing? I would rather see more of what Tolkien had to say than I would Amazon's interpretation of what Tolkien had to say. So I'll leave it there and wrap that up about intellectual property. Final thing, it comes down to the very words that you use. Peter Jackson couldn't use Celebrimbor. The Amazon promotion, the Amazon production cannot use elements of the Second Age from the Silmarillion. So they're going to change it up a bit, a lot of it, little bit. And it's going to be different. It's not going to adhere to the timelines. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to adhere to the timelines, doesn't have to adhere to the characters of the published canon. That's what's important. I would rather see that. I would rather see the published canon than I would have some stuff that's not in the spirit of Tolkien shoved down my throat like Soylent Green. So, appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching. And until next time, peace out.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.